Welcome to the Upside Journal podcast. In 2026, domestic venture capital is struggling with extended exit timelines in dry powder gridlock. Yet, a sophisticated layer of cross-border diaspora business networks is quietly unlocking predictable, counter-cyclical returns in AI and climate tech. Today, we're breaking down the hidden alpha traditional funds are missing. That's right, the old playbooks, they're totally failing. We're witnessing a complete, fundamental restructuring of how value is both created and protected across emerging digital ecosystems.
Okay, so let's set the macroeconomic stage here. It's mid-2026, and the regulatory environment in key African markets, especially places like Nigeria and Kenya, has matured incredibly fast. We're talking strict enforcement of robust data protection acts alongside some pretty sweeping open banking frameworks.
Exactly. Add to that the recent tax reforms and these new extraterritorial compliance mandates, and it's a whole new ballgame. International players literally have no choice but to adhere to local data laws now. But here's the kicker. Instead of seeing this as a bunch of bureaucratic red tape, elite operators are actually using these strict data sovereignty mandates to secure counter-cyclical returns. They are thriving while the broader market is gridlocked.
So our briefing today is going to systematically deconstruct this. We've got four main acts. First, the VC paradox of 2026. Then, asymmetric information and verification. Third is the supply chain edge. And we'll wrap it up with the repeatable flywheel framework.
All right, let's jump straight into Act 1, the VC paradox of 2026.
You know, there is a massive strategic disconnect right now, and it is entirely stalling capital deployment. Traditionally, startups have run on this scale first, govern later mentality. Grow user acquisition at all costs, move fast, break things, and just assume the legal architecture can be glued together later. And honestly, traditional domestic venture funds are still sluggish and stuck in the mud because of it, dealing with all the downstream liabilities. But on the flip side, you have these incredibly agile diaspora founders. They're taking a completely different route. They're executing a high-conviction strategies by building governance directly into the core code from day one. We call this compliance by design. They understand that the African digital economy isn't operating in a vacuum anymore. It's this complex, overlapping ecosystem of data protection and cybersecurity laws that absolutely require upstream integration.
There's this fantastic piece of legal intelligence from Lawyard that really drives this home. The gist of it is absolutely crucial. Delaying data compliance doesn't just stall things, it actively destroys capital returns. If you defer governance, you're inevitably going to be forced to rebuild your legal infrastructure post-scale. And doing that while you're under the microscope of a regulatory audit or while investors are holding up due diligence, that is literally the most expensive, high-pressure environment possible for a redesign. While traditional VCs have their capital frozen in administrative overhauls, these compliance-first architectures just bypass the friction entirely.
Which brings us perfectly to Act 2, asymmetric information and talent verification.
So if compliance is foundational infrastructure rather than just an afterthought, the top-tier operators are leveraging what we call regulatory weaponization. Think about it. These diaspora operators have spent years navigating brutal US and EU regulatory regimes like the GDPR. They inherently understand compliance as a powerful feature, not a bug.
Right, so they're proactively utilizing local data laws, things like strict data localization and hyper-granular consent, to actively block copycat competitors. They weaponize the exact same regulations that totally paralyze global tech multinationals and unprepared local startups. It turns policy compliance into this massive, impenetrable competitive moat.
And the numbers completely back this up. By designing regional API rails that are strictly focused on data minimization and localized processing, these founders are seeing a 30% faster path to regulator approval. 30%! That asymmetric advantage is a real game changer. It accelerates the go-to-market timeline and instantly builds trust with lucrative enterprise partners and banks. Those institutions absolutely require unassailable compliance guarantees before they'll even consider a partnership.
Let's pivot to Act 3, the climate tech supply chain edge.
As this digital economy rapidly expands into data-heavy sectors like AI and climate tech, data governance essentially becomes a critical supply chain issue. We're looking at two very different paths here. Historically, the big global multinationals used offshore processing, essentially global extraction models with very little oversight. But today, that model is incredibly vulnerable to regulatory enforcement and massive penalties.
Exactly. So the alternative, championed by these elite diaspora networks, is building sovereign data pipelines. They route sensitive operations through local or regional clouds. This acts as a robust data extraction defense, practically slashing operational risk. It creates an audit-ready architecture that just sails right through institutional due diligence.
And the real macroeconomic payoff of this regulatory weaponization, it's economic value retention. Compliance by design APIs build this permanent, highly investable moat around local data.
Yeah, so instead of raw data being scraped, shipped to the global north for processing, and then sold back to Africa as an expensive AI or climate product, the value stays right there in the local ecosystem. It completely aligns with digital sovereignty goals and ensures that local data is actually driving local GDP growth.
Let's bring it all together in Act 4, the repeatable flywheel framework. So, how do allocators actually execute on this and find these high-trust ecosystems? The Diaspora Playbook relies on a 4-phase flywheel. Step 1 is early compliance team integration, literally day 1 stuff. Step 2 is building those audit-ready architectures we just talked about. Step 3 is proactive regulator engagement. Don't hide from regulators, join their sandboxes, and help shape the policy.
And Step 4 is the real force multiplier, AFCFTA-aligned interoperability. By designing for interoperability under the African Continental Free Trade Area's digital protocols, these companies are positioning themselves for absolute regional dominance. They're turning fragmented, individual markets into one massive, cohesive scale.
If you're an institutional investor, consider this your ultimate due diligence checklist. You want to see specific engineering milestones, real-time logging, explainability features, and granular data minimization hard-coded right into the platform.
Right, and these operators are absolute masters at establishing dual networks. They connect global capital from diaspora hubs directly with deep, localized regulatory relationships. These are the precise, data-driven business mechanics that de-risk investments way before mainstream VC firms even realize there's a deal to be made.
Host 2. The market is sending an undeniable signal. Governance in African tech has permanently shifted from an administrative hurdle to the very bedrock of sustainable growth. So it all comes down to this critical strategic imperative. The era of retrofitting compliance is totally over. Are you going to adapt proactively to this compliance-first architecture, or are you going to be left scrambling and reacting when the regulatory pressure inevitably mounts? Capital has become highly commoditized, but the infrastructure to execute high-trust, cross-border deal flow is rare. To get ahead of these macro signals and access our premium investor network, subscribe to the Upside Journal and join our membership communities. See you in the next Daily Drop.